Good morning. Today is July 30th, the year 2020. It is a Thursday. We're going to continue our look at the book Thinking About God by Fisher Humphreys. This is the second edition that I have and have had since he was my professor for theology way back in seminary, at which point it was a new book, I believe. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 4, Human Beings, Us. Now, you might think, well, why are we proceeding to human beings? Last time we talked about God, should we talk about the other members of the Trinity? Yes and no. Yes, that is normally how theological discussions are laid out. But I think it's necessary for our understanding, and apparently Fisher did too, that we talk about human beings so that then we can talk about human beings in relationship to God and the other members of the Trinity. So, we want to talk about human beings. Now, last time I got a little ahead of ourselves and talked about how human beings are created by God. Not simply our ancestors, but all of us are created by God. And that is certainly an emphasis we want to make. We want to focus on Genesis chapters 1 and the first little verse there of chapter 2. Genesis is something that I have talked about before, and you can go back and look at that if you like. And so there are a couple of things we can say about the creation of human beings as described in Genesis, beginning around chapter 1, uh, verse, what is it, about 26? So, first, human beings in the story are created last. Yes, in the personal story of Adam and Eve, human beings are created very early. But in this story, they are created last. It is intended to give us a sense of human beings as the pinnacle of God's creation. Second, human beings are the only things said to be created in God's image. Now, put a pin in that. We're going to come back to what that means in just a second. In fact, it's kind of the main thrust of our discussion today. Third, human beings are given dominion over creation. I'm going to put a little aside there right now. Dominion implies lordship, but as a famous man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. I think human beings we have abused our dominion severely. And looking back at history, we have often done so. Um, the issue of human impact on the environment is a big one, and not necessarily something that we have time to go into right now, but it's important. Fourth, after creating everything else, God said that it was good. When he created human beings, he said they were very good. Fifth and finally, to human beings alone, God breathed the breath of life. In Hebrew, the word breath, ruach, is the same word for spirit. And God, and this is actually in chapter 2, God imbues us with his spirit. This is probably going to go back and tie into our discussion of what it means to be made in the image of God. Um, that is a key component of what human beings are. These beings made in the image of God. The thing is, there is not consensus about what that means. at all. Um, the first possible interpretation is that human beings literally are in the image of God, in that physically we look like God, that God looks like us. Um, I don't think that that's really widely held by anyone seriously now. Uh, Certainly, it would be contrary to God's holy, transcendent nature if he looked like us. Second, some have suggested that it is humans' ability to reason, to be rational. Uh, that was certainly something proposed before we built computers. uh, and before we had a better understanding of how some animal minds worked. So we move then to the human ability to make moral judgments as the image of God. Um, and then fourth, because the image of God is directly tied to dominion over the earth, they said that the image of God is human authority. Uh, Karl Barth, in his discussion of Genesis, says that the image of God is the human capacity to enter into close, loving relationships. Uh, Again, I don't know if that is entirely unique to human beings. And then sixth, Dorothy Sayers suggested in The Mind of the Maker that human creativity is the image of God. We need to say that the Bible doesn't tell us what the image of God is, only that it's important. Um, it does, I think all of these we can agree on two things, and then I'm going to make a comment that's not in the text, but kind of my understanding of it. One is that the image of God implies a special relationship between God and human beings. Um, it also refers to something that God has given to human beings that sets us apart from other creation. So, closer to God than the rest of creation in that sense. Um, Fisher comes to the conclusion that personhood, being personal, is what it means to be in the image of God. Um, we speak of God as a person. In fact, we talk about the Trinity, God in one person, and that human beings are persons. And to me, that is a fair, modern restatement of the idea of the image of God. I'm perfectly okay with that. But I want to say two additional things. One, other than the physicality, the other five, uh, reason, moral judgment, responsibility, authority, dominion, however you want to say it, uh, the capacity to enter into relationships, and creativity. I think the image of God a is a combination of all of them. It is a gestalt. Gestalt is a German word for a whole, but it implies a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. That is what the image of God is. Now, um, I also want to mention that there are those who say the fall erased the image of God in human beings. That is rationally untrue and biblically untrue. First, it is rationally untrue in that if the image of God is removed from human beings, then that does not make us any different than the animals. As we continue to see that there is a relationship between us and God and a difference between us and animals, we must say that the image of God persists. Second, in Genesis, after the flood, in chapter 9, I believe, uh, the punishment for violating the image of God by taking another human life is that by man your life will be taken. Um, it is clear in Scripture that the image of God persists in human beings even after the fall. And we're going to talk about that aspect of humanity in just a second. So let's go back to Fisher's assertion that human beings are personal, are persons, and that is what it means to be in the image of God. He defines this in a couple ways. He says that a human being is a self, um, in a way that other things are not. Um, it is good to be a self, although characteristics such as selfishness and self-centeredness are not good, and in fact, are probably due to our limitations and our inability to have faith in God. We'll talk more about that in a second. We are self-aware. We are capable of thinking about who we are. We live in this world, but we also transcend it in the sense that we are capable of thoughts and reactions not tied to our physical surroundings and immediate needs. We are intelligent. We are free. We are not getting into determinism versus free will. We are simply saying that there are many things in our life that may be predetermined, but that there is a margin of genuine freedom in human existence. We are capable of making value judgments. We are capable of creating. We are capable of living in community. We are in a continuum where we are aware of a past, even a past beyond ourselves, and we are pulled to a future, even a future beyond ourselves. Ultimately, we are a mystery. Again, something we have some clues about, but we don't really understand ourselves. We don't. Neither as human beings, individually or collectively. This is an important place to start because there is another aspect of human beings, and if we were to start there, I think we would come away with a very incorrect understanding of humanity. The first assertion we make is that human beings are created in the image of God. The second assertion we make is that human beings are what is traditionally called in Christian theology sinners. We miss the mark. We make choices that are contrary to what is right, and we make mistakes in accomplishing righteousness. This is due to the fact that we are free. If we were not free, we would not be considered sinners. If we were not free, we would not have a choice and therefore not have a moral responsibility for our actions. We are free and therefore we have a moral responsibility for our actions. We choose to do wrong. Paul expresses in Romans 7, he says that the good that I would do, I do not do, and the very thing I hate, that is which I do. That not only has he made wrong choices, sinful choices, but that he cannot help but do so on occasion. He's not making a statement about all the time. He is talking about sometimes this is what happens. That is the nature of sin. It is this fundamental state of humanity. Now, I'm going to deviate here a little bit from Fisher's discussion, although it certainly is in here. Reinhold Niebuhr, in a book called The Nature and Destiny of Man, which I'm going to warn you if you try to read Reinhold Niebuhr thinks in German and writes in English, and that takes a lot of getting used to. It is not a book for laymen. But there is an idea that he expresses that essentially works out like this. We are limited. There is nothing wrong being limited. God made us limited. God also made us with the capacity to make choices. There is nothing wrong with the capacity to make choices. But because that's how God made us. Because we are limited and because we have the capacity to make choices, sometimes we must make choices without all the information and without knowing all the outcomes. We experience anxiety because of this. Fear of the unknown. This too is part of the human condition, and there is nothing wrong with it. The problem comes in our two reactions to our limited nature and our need to make a choice. One, we can make the choice in faith, doing what is right and not worrying about consequence, in faith that there is a God and that God is the ultimate judge and that no matter what happens, we should do what we believe God wants us to do. And in doing so, we are right. Or we can act in our limitations without faith. And when we do that, we are more likely to be in error, that error being sin. Okay? So, to recap, human beings limited, fine. Human beings capable of choice, good. Human beings afraid, not pleasant, but not morally wrong. Faith informs our choices. We do what is right. Faith does not inform our choices. We are capable of the outcome being right, but we are prone to make an error. And let me just add that when I say faith there, I mean faith in a standard. Certainly we would want to get into how faith in God, but faith that there is a good outside of our own immediate circumstances. So, in conclusion, we see in this chapter two things. Human beings are made in the image of God. It is very, very important for us to remember that and not forget. I am made in the image of God. You are made in the image of God. All the people around us are made in the image of God. When we forget that they are made in the image of God, we begin to treat them as things, as other, as not part of us, and that leads to sin. When we forget that we are made in the image of God, it leads to self-abuse, self-doubt, self-harm, bad. The second thing, we are sinners. We are in error. We make mistakes. And as we will see, the solution to those mistakes, the answer to those mistakes is what was in chapter 5, Jesus. So until next time, be thinking about the things we've talked about today. Think about how you see the image of God in yourself and in others. And think about how you react to your own sinfulness. And next time we will talk about Jesus. Till then, God bless you.